Welcome to Conscious Corner with Courtney. Today's guest is someone I met first when I was practicing as a litigator. I was retained to represent a property owner in a case where he represented the injured plaintiffs. We ultimately resolved the case, but what stood out to me most was how civil he was. He advocated strongly for his clients while still maintaining integrity, professionalism, and groundedness throughout the entire process. Fast forward to today, I'm honored to welcome Thomas Bosworth to the show, one of the most recognized plaintiff's trial lawyers in Pennsylvania. He's secured one of the largest medical malpractice and wrongful death verdicts in PA. He's been recognized as a National Trial Lawyers Top 40 Under 40, and he's been featured in countless outlets such as CBS, NBC, ABC, Fox, The Guardian, and the Philadelphia Inquirer. But what we're talking about today isn't just verdicts, it's what it takes mentally, emotionally, physically to sustain excellence in one of the most high pressure professions in the country. So it's a great honor, Tom, to have you here on the episode today and to get to be back together, only this time we're not on opposite sides of the V. So a great welcome
To
to
be
have
here.
you here. Yeah,
Thanks, Courtney.
my pleasure. So I want to just sort of explore when you think back to yourself as a younger lawyer, or maybe even when you were studying to become a lawyer, what was your relationship with stress and performance, and what did success mean to you then?
It was about as bad as you could get. I totally bought into I mean, first of all, when I got to law school, I did not feel like I belonged there. I felt like everybody else had some blueprint for success, and I felt completely out of place. You know, I think a lot of that was just internal. My mom worked in restaurants. My dad was a police officer in a town of 2,000 people. So I looked around and I went to Temple in Philly.
Mhm.
And I was like, geez, I don't know what I'm doing here. So I think there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of uncertainty, which in a sense motivated me.
Yeah.
But I did not have any, despite growing up playing sports and stuff, I really didn't apply any governor or like filter to that early on because I was so petrified of not knowing what you're doing. I think there's that, when you go to law school, everybody feels that way, but
Yeah.
we don't talk about it that much. And
Right.
so I think I developed bad habits before I developed good habits.
And that really resonates with me. I feel like we have a certain stereotype or an image of like what we should be if we're really like a true law student or cut out to be a lawyer. And that really does follow through where subconsciously or internally we're thinking that, but because we're maybe afraid or scared of how we're be, how we might be perceived by others, that we kind of stuff it down. So, how did that affect you in terms of how you manage the stressors in law school?
Well, it was kind of interesting because I think like the harder I worked and the more I put in these crazy 12-hour days, sometimes more reading and writing, and you know how rigorous it is. I mean,
Yeah.
I was lucky enough to do well academically, which had not been the case for me in college. I was like doing other things in college. I went to school on the beach, like I was in Florida, so I I buckled down, so to speak, in law school, but
Yeah.
I think it was sort of this double-edged sword where it was good to get that affirmation that okay, when you put in this hard work, you can get good results.
Yeah.
Um, so that was good, but I do think it also reinforced some of those bad habits of not taking care of yourself, and particularly not like taking time to pause and let have that self-care, whether that's exercise or yoga or like I wasn't doing that at all in law school. So but I was sort of like it was like, success, I'm using air quotes,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
reinforced those, I think, habits of go, go, go. And I don't know about you, but there was nobody with that loud of a voice in my law school life that was like, hey, slow down and like take care of yourself. Like it was all very like everybody was sort of doing the same things.
Yeah, I think the message we're fed or we're pumped with is to keep going and keep pushing beyond our limits. And it's almost like we wear it as a badge of honor that we pulled an all-nighter, or we worked this long on something, or we haven't eaten since this time. And so in a sense, even though we're kind of bragging or trying to showcase how devoted we are to our studies or to doing a good job, inside our bodies, our minds, I think the emotions that show up are giving us cues that it's not sustainable. Was there, you mentioned the ability to pause. Was there a moment where you were able to pause and recognize that that way of kind of like grinding out and not having healthy resources to support you, that way of doing wasn't sustainable?
Wasn't actually till I graduated law school.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember graduating and like waiting for this huge sense of relief because I had just been grinding for 3 straight years. And then
Yeah.
it's funny how the body and the mind work. I didn't feel that relief. I felt this gaping hole, this like vacuum, because I had filled that 3 years with just constant adrenaline, constant cortisol, stress. And then
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden it was like gone and I wasn't going to class. And I remember feeling so anxious. I couldn't figure it out. And then I started actually doing, which I never did before. I started going to yoga classes.
Yeah.
So, and I grew up in like a very like, how should I say this? I love where I grew up, but men weren't speaking like fondly about yoga where I came from. It was very like small town. My
Yeah.
dad was a cop. Like he would get made fun of even back then. Like, oh,
Right. Right.
but I'm like, I don't know. Like, so I started doing that, and of course, it transformed my life. I felt like really centered, and that I think that was like kind of the beginning of my journey to learning to take care of myself as a lawyer. But for sure I didn't like perfect it there because then I obviously went into practice and had bumps along the way, so it wasn't like I figured it all out all at once.
Right. At some point though, you discovered that tools like yoga could help to center yourself. And I know something that you shared with me and that I think is extremely powerful is your sobriety, and that you've been sober for 14 years. So I'm curious what prompted that shift, and how did it ultimately affect you, not just personally, but professionally?
Yeah, well, I actually got sober when I was 22, so I was a senior in college, and you know, I'm not a expert, but if you look at my family tree, you wouldn't be like shocked at
Mhm.
the drinking history and all that. But I was lucky enough that, I had enough pain and consequence at a young age from drinking and other stuff that basically like I hit a point where I like asked for help. And it was, I always prided myself on being like, I'm strong, I'm in
Yeah.
control. I played college baseball, I was captain of the basketball team in high school. I did well academically, I scored
Mhm.
well, but that was one thing I could not get, I couldn't control it. For whatever reason, whether it's genetic or whatever, like I couldn't, it was not controllable. So I thank God I like got, support for that. And then one day at a time for 14 years, haven't had a drop of alcohol or anything. But, um, I think like for someone like me that can rear its head even when you're not drinking or whatever. And I noticed that it can, I can become out of sorts and seek out other ways to numb myself and that can be work, right? So that was a
Yeah.
good
Yeah.
outlet for me as a young lawyer to really, oh, okay, I can dive headfirst into this and just immerse myself in this work, which is good, but there's limits to it, right? And then, you know, I had to learn the hard way that you can burn yourself out that way. And if you're just, you know, seeking these external validations or this
Mhm.
external whatever that might be, it's kind of a losing game no matter what, because our profession is so so results driven, and it's so like surface, uh I don't want to say superficial, but there's so
Yeah.
much emphasis on who's where and this hierarchy. And I just find that that's really not conducive to your well-being at all in any sense of the word. And I think the biggest struggle for me has been like learning to live with both that ambition and drive to do very well for my clients and be the
Hmm.
best lawyer I can be, but also not to become attached to that, and also have that part of me that's able to like slow down and breathe and see myself not just as a lawyer but as a like a human or a father,
Human being. Yeah.
fiance, all those things that we actually are that make us who we are. Because I feel like a lot of us, I'll speak for myself, that going to law school, becoming a lawyer, like it's an identity saturation. Like you're like the other things that make you who you are can sometimes fall to the wayside if you're not
Yeah.
careful.
That totally resonates with me because I felt like a lot of the qualities of who I've always been, who I was, I sort of put them away. They were on hold because I was striving to be this model of what I thought it meant to be a good attorney or a great attorney. And I think that we do get so pigeonhole focus on outcomes, and it's because we care about doing a good job and getting great outcomes for our clients. But in the midst of all that, we have to remember that we count too. And if we're not paying attention to how driven we are, and we're losing all of the meaningful parts of our lives that really light us up, that give us the fuel to keep going, that it is a recipe for burnout. But what I love that is coming through, because at such a young age, you recognized a sort of like the, from a genetic standpoint or from your your family, the sort of, I don't want to say the hardwiring, but your propensity, your the relationship to alcohol, that awareness to be able to recognize how potentially that could play out with you and to make a choice to have a healthier relationship around alcohol and to recognize even your patterns with overworking. I think so often, as you mentioned earlier, we get caught in the going, that it's really hard to recognize some of the maladaptive coping mechanisms when we're grinding out. So that's huge. I think that speaks to the power of mental strength, but what I also hear you sharing is the importance in physical strength and physical well-being. So I'm interested in what your what your workout regimen is like in terms of your physical, your physical wellness, but also you mentioned how challenging it can be to work in the legal sector. So in terms of your mental well-being, what kinds of routines do you turn to help you promote a healthier mental and physical well-being?
Yeah, I've gotten away from the yoga, which now that we're talking about it, I'm like, I got to get back into it.
Yeah.
But I've really been disciplined in weightlifting, and going to the gym and lifting weights, uh, 5 days a week, and doing cardio too, and getting on the treadmill and doing like uphill walking at a high
Oh.
and so like I used to like run, but now I find that like the uphill walking is less of like a, I feel like I'm less in a competition or a race,
Mhm.
and it's more
Yeah.
about actually being healthy and like, doing something that's, a sustained thing for 30 minutes and mixing that with lifting. And then I also am like addicted to the sauna. So I'm a huge sauna
Ooh,
proponent.
me
So
too.
I do that at least 5 days a week, and I'm,
Yeah.
25 minutes, probably unhealthy that long, but I just love I've done a lot of like research on the actual effects of sauna, which are indisputably like great for your mental and physical well-being.
Yeah.
So I'm just really all about that. And I feel like when I do that and I'm doing those things in a routine, I'm like, I'm good. And
Yeah.
then, but then I still fall off though. Like I get like, weeks where I'm like, kind of wobbly, but I think for the most part, I've been really tied into that, which is good. Because in law school, I totally gave up that, and I've always been an athlete, so
Yeah.
uh, it's so good for the mind, and that's yeah. So that's what I've been doing.
I'm right there with you with the sauna. I say like I know that the cold plunge is such a it supposedly has all its benefits, but I say like the my life itself is like a cold plunge. I'm always cold. So like the sauna, I say like that's what calms my nervous system. That's what makes me
Me
feel
too.
good.
Yeah.
And like you, I used to be a huge yoga practitioner. I used to use yoga when I was working in the city at in Philadelphia, a law firm. That was like the day, in the middle of the day, I would leave the firm and go during the lunch hour. That was my way to decompress, to kind of like balance out body and mind. And when I learned mindfulness meditation, I sort of dove in like deep and I found there's only so many hours in a day, but there's such a connection between the mind and the body that I don't set resolutions. I like to be more intentional than like being rigid around resolutions, but I wanted to intentionally try to bring back some more of the body work and yoga. So the two really complement each other. When you mentioned like sometimes you can fall off routine or things change up, I imagine, depending on the nature of your work. If you're on trial, sometimes you can't always follow the same routine. But do you notice a change in your mood or your clarity or how it is you're feeling in the body when you fall off your routine?
Yeah, night and day. And
Yeah,
I think about, just as a trial lawyer, when I was younger, like when you're on trial, as I'm sure you know, it's like all or nothing. You're
yeah.
completely immersed for that 1 week or 2 week or even 3 weeks, or some of my trials go 3 weeks, and a lot of people don't understand that you're in court all day from like 9 to 4:30 or 9 to 5,
Hmm.
and during that time, because part of that is performance and theater. I mean, you're in front of a jury of people. You have to be on. You have to be mentally and physically alert, and you have to have your composure. You really can't slip up if you're doing your best job. You can't, you shouldn't say you can't slip up. Everybody has human moments,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
you have to know your case, and every day you're cramming. But then when you get out of court, you got stuff to do for the next day. So
right,
when I
right.
was younger, I was just unhinged. Like I wouldn't sleep. I would stay up till 2 in the morning preparing cross exam outlines. And as I've gotten older, I'm way different now. I'm very much like I need to sleep,
Yeah.
because like if I don't sleep, like I know my case. I'm like, I've done it enough times now where I'm like, by the time we get to trial, I've had this case for 2, 3 years. I know
Hmm.
my case. I know what I need to say to this jury. I know how I need to question this witness. Not that I don't prepare, but I care way more about like taking care of myself than I do about some neurotic like quest to like find every factor, or like learn everything and then staying up till 2 in the morning. Because when you do that, you're really just you're spinning your wheels, and you're not allowing yourself to remain in a calm state, which is, in my opinion, the most important factor for whether you're going to perform well. And I think that just comes with time, and trusting yourself and doing it. Because I don't think it's not like, I'm not suggesting if you're like a brand new lawyer that like you're doing something wrong because you're up
Yeah.
late. Like it's a natural thing, and you should want to strive. But I do think you can also learn to trust yourself and learn to be confident without going overboard. I don't know if that makes sense, but
It makes total sense. You're like a walking mindfulness advertisement right now because we talk about what are known as the attitudinal foundations of mindfulness. And then to your point, I think when we are younger attorneys, before we have lots of experiences, it's really hard to trust ourselves and we can be so nervous to mess up. But as we get more and more experience and we deepen our trust, that trust is one of the greatest gifts that we can extend to ourselves. So I love that you're sharing that. And what I also love is that we're often conditioned or told to just really lean into the intensity. And what you're sharing is like, yes, we're not kicking back and just coasting and seeing how things play out. You're very driven, and clearly over the years of the lifeline of the case, you know your cases inside and out. But there is a piece that's so important that allows us to get great outcomes, and that's the clarity piece. The clarity over the intensity and the ability to calm ourselves and to find balance. That's what allows us to perform our best. And I think that you're not always taught that in law school. It's always work harder, try more and more and more, and we want to, again, that striving piece. It's important to have a sense of goals. Like we want to set high expectations for ourselves, but we also want to find ways to care ourselves and to balance our nervous systems when things get really busy and challenging.
And I feel like in law school, I feel like it's such a cerebral thing, and you're trained to think so hard, and it's intellectual and it's mental. And then just in terms of what I do as a jury trial lawyer,
Mm-hmm.
I've had to do a lot of untraining of that
Mm,
because you learn really quickly if you're paying attention when you're in a courtroom. Not that law school doesn't matter. I think it matters a lot. And not that, but you're in a you're in a human theater, so to speak. There's 12 people there that
yeah.
if you want to do well, you need to connect with those people. And I don't mean that in like an inauthentic, you need to be acting and tricking them. I mean, you really need to authentically connect with them. And no,
Yeah.
and that you don't do that by obsessively just using your brain. I mean, there's a lot more that goes into that, body language and feeling and being empathetic and
Yeah.
feeling where people are coming from emotionally, whether that's a juror or a witness. Because if you're just up here, you're missing all that stuff, and all that stuff's way more important. Um, but it's obviously a balance because you also have to know your subject matter. You have to know your stuff. If you're trying a medical malpractice case, which is 80% of the ones I do, you need to
Mhm.
know what hyperbolic syndrome means, and you have to be able to explain that to 12 people in a way they can understand it. So I'm not saying just go in there, shoot from the hip, but
Yeah.
you can't just leave behind the human element of being in the courtroom. But I think that I don't know that we learn that in law school. I didn't learn that much in law school.
Yeah.
Maybe a little during trial advocacy, but not that much.
The human touch has so much value to it. Tom, I had a unique experience before going to law school. I worked as a court crier for two prominent judges in the Court of Common Pleas in Philadelphia.
So
And
you know what I mean.
I know what you mean, and I've seen some of the best attorneys. If they didn't connect with the jury, if they didn't come through as authentic and caring and true, they could be the brightest attorneys, but that human touch, that ability to connect with people who are ultimately going to decide the case, that's so important. And I do think that they are some of the qualities, some of the pieces of being a really successful trial attorney that are left out of the equation. But when you can tap into that, jurors, they connect with you, and you're more, they trust you more, and chances are they're gonna rule in favor of your client, so, or at least decide in favor of your client. So I want to just close with one last question. If there's a younger attorney out there, or maybe someone who's in law school who is maybe struggling, they're not sure if they fit in or if they fit the mold of what it means to be a good lawyer, what's one piece of advice that you want to share with them?
What I would say is what I wish that I felt and what I wish someone had said to me, which is that you are absolutely enough exactly the way that you are. You are totally enough. You are amazing, and you should really hone into yourself and love yourself and develop those parts of yourself, not run away from them. You don't need to be anybody but who you are, because there's so much pressure to be a lawyer. And what does that even mean? What does it mean to be a lawyer? Well, it just means you're learning how to be a lawyer, but you're you above all. So, and nobody's going to be the better, nobody's going to be the best you other than you. I think that we, yeah. So I would just say, lean into that part of yourself, even if you feel like you should run the other way.
I'm taking you on the road with me. I think you're just like a walking mindfulness advertisement to, embrace all of who you are, that you are intrinsically whole just as you are. So I want to end on that note, but before we close out, I want to give you an opportunity to share ways that people can connect with you if they're looking to hire an attorney. How can they reach out to you and learn more about your work?
You can email me at tom@bosworthfirm.com. That's my email, BOSWORTH firm.com. And my phone number at my office is 267-928-4183.
I like how you preface that, at my office, my telephone number at my office. Well, I want to thank you. I know how busy you are. I know all the great work that you're doing. So it really means a lot to have you here on the show. And I appreciate all the wisdom that you shared and your time. So thanks so much, Tom.
Thank you, Courtney.
Take care.